Hello and welcome to another episode of People Know It, the podcast for people, season 3, The Hidden Gems. I am at the moment reporting from the banks of the river Brahmaputra, and in this episode we are going to discuss the interconnected water bodies of Guwahati city, their cry for help, their plan for development, and more generally, just their story. So you can see a lot of construction going around me, and trust me, ideally this is not the location that I would choose when I come to see the Brahmaputra, because where I am standing right now, you do see the Brahmaputra, but you are quite distracted because of all the construction going around the Brahmaputra river. I mean, in my previous episode, I spoke to you in detail about how important the river Brahmaputra is for Assam and for the people of Assam. I also spoke about the artistic inspiration that the river Brahmaputra carries and that it offers to people. I've also spoken about the cultural importance. This episode, we're going to talk more about planning and construction and what's happening in the state with respect to development of the water bodies. So the central government has come up with a smart cities mission, under which it is selecting a few cities across the country to become smart cities, and the idea is to invest in these cities in areas that are going to upscale the city and upgrade the city with the aim to drive sustainable outcomes. Guwahati was the only city that got shortlisted from the northeast of Assam, and we have now a special JV that has been set up to achieve the smart outcomes and to upgrade the city into a smart city. The process, it's been a while since the smart mission has been going on, and one of the key plans is an area-based development project which aims at rejuvenating the water bodies, the interconnected water bodies of the city, which includes the riverfront, the Brahmaputra Riverfront, a wetland, and a lake, a river, the Bharalu River. And we are going to discuss all these interconnected water bodies in today's episode. I'm starting off with the riverfront, and the background that you see in this episode is actually the Brahmaputra Riverfront. The interconnected water bodies in Guwahati are spread across 696 acres, and the project that has been going on in full swing is the Brahmaputra Riverfront development. So we have waterfronts in Mumbai, we have a waterfront in Chennai, and it's amazing to walk in the waterfront in these cities. Guwahati is attempting something similar. You can see behind me there are lights and there is a bridge being constructed. The idea is to construct a walkable path for people with benches where they can take walks in the evening. They can also cycle if they want, and to have lights installed so that it represents a beautiful walking riverfront. And architecturally, you might think it's a good attempt, because in the long term it's going to help the city. In the short term, it has meant some discomfort because it has led to, of course, felling of the trees to construct these ramps and to construct the sidewalks. It has also meant that it may not be possible to see the river from the road, as was the case earlier. You could just drive close to the river and see the river from the road, and now that just might not be the case. In fact, to get in here, I had to walk through the bridge, under the bridge, to get close to the river, and I'm not quite sure I actually like that, because I think there's a charm in having that driveway as well. There are some spots in the area where you can still view the river directly from the road, but a majority of that could be lost because of this project. So the government has outlined 160 crores for landscape development and over 600 crores for riverbank protection in this project. And riverbank protection is absolutely essential. But the problem with this kind of a step is always that, does it take away the resources that could also be utilized towards restoration of other water bodies in the city? Or is it the case that we see a lot of investment happening in riverfront development because this is something that can be easily achieved, as it requires construction of more concrete, which we are quite sure about and which we have the technology to execute. Whereas more difficult activities like cleaning river, sectioning of drains, or restoring drains, or investing in sewage treatment, or restoring the wetlands to their former glory requires more effort, more planning, more coordination, which is difficult to achieve. And I think that is the question that I'm trying to explore in this episode, that is a lot of the goodwill or good intentions of protecting the river bodies lost with the concept note or the project plans that are prepared, and execution only boils down to the technologies that we have access to or that we feel more comfortable about. We continue to see development or upscaling in a specific area, and we don't see much progress in other areas. So I think that is something that we need to bear in mind, because at the end, I do think that it is important from a tourism perspective and biodiversity perspective to make sure that you are presenting your biodiversity in the most lush and plush manner. And if a riverfront was built here, would I not come for a stroll? Of course, I would like the idea of coming for a leisurely stroll on the riverfront, but does that have to come at the cost of resource allocation to other areas and other water bodies in the state? That is a moot point, and that is something we need to discuss and take a hard look at the facts. Can the budget that has been allocated towards the beautification be spent in acquiring the technology that is needed to improve the quality of other water bodies, which would improve the overall appearance of the city? Because I think sometimes what happens is, when we know that we have 5 different weak points in the city, but there is one place where we can really invest all our resources and make it strong, we tend to play to our strengths because we already feel that some of the weak spots in us on the water map are a lost battle. But the question is it really a lost battle? Or is it just a case of not looking hard enough for the right technology and for the right support to... So the first big problem that exists in the city is that of River Bharalu. In fact, I'm standing right now next to River Bharalu. It does not look like a river because honestly it has lost all the characteristics that make it a river. It has essentially boiled down to being a sewage carrier in the city. Borsola River was not always like this, and you go to any person in the city, and everybody has a sad story to tell about the river Bharalu. I never saw Bharalu River in its glory, but my understanding from anecdotes of people, and these are anecdotes that I've heard or anecdotes that I've read, is the river, and it's a fact as well, that the river used to be clean. People used to play in the river, they used to fish in the river, but all of that changed with the advent of urbanization and industrialization of the Guwahati in the Guwahati city. More than urbanization, it has been industrialization, which first led to the problem of industries discharging their oil waste into the river. Now the problem here is that, as we have already discussed, Guwahati runs, the water bodies in Guwahati are interconnected. So the quality of one water body is bound to impact the quality of other water bodies. So clearly, when the Bharalu River started getting polluted with waste from the oil industries that started coming up, that started making its way to the river Brahmaputra. But it didn't stop there. From carrying industrial waste, the river started carrying urban waste as well. And that is due to the settlement that started coming up on the river bank. Now, with the bigger problem here is that the sewage that goes into River Bharalu is untreated. In fact, Guwahati for the longest time, Guwahati has survived without a sewage treatment plan, and that the untreated sewage in the Bharalu River is not good for the river, and neither is it good for the people that live around the river. Our sewage in the city is managed by septic tanks that are located underground, And that's not an ideal state because it affects the quality of groundwater. But that is how Guwahati has survived for the longest time. The sewage system has survived on the basis of the natural drainage system that exists and the underground septic tanks during floods. Now, one of the, of course, overflowing of the river Brahmaputra and the other interconnected bodies is a reason for floods in the city. But a bigger reason for floods in the city is the bad urban planning and is the bad construction or the layout of the city. So, because we don't have a proper drainage system, you often find the streets being flooded with water during the monsoon. All that water gets drained out from the clogged cities to this river Bharalu. That way, the Bharalu drainage river system, whatever you call it, has played an important role in making sure that the flood water gets pumped out of it. And that's how flood management has been done in the city for the longest time, through pumping systems and through sluice gates. You actually behind me, if you can see, there is a pump outlet. It's a pipe outlet into the drainage or into the river, and during floods you would see that the water from the adjoining area, and this is an area that's the lane I'm standing in is heavily flooded. In fact, there are lanes and by lanes in this area where flooding is a regular occurrence, so much so that you would find watermarks inside houses and in buildings indicating the water level during flooding. And the water levels are sometimes also retained just to make sure you know where to place your goods so that they don't get destroyed in the upcoming seasons. The locals do a lot on their own to make sure that flood doesn't enter their houses, which includes constructing their own mini embankments in the house. But that doesn't solve the problem because there can be underground water seepage as well during flood situations. Now, the bad part about flooding is that because this is a drain and because it carries untreated sewage, you can imagine that if the level of this river rises during floods, it flows into the city, which is a big threat, which is not ideal from a hygiene perspective, and it's not ideal from any measure of environmentalism or just basic sanitation, basic hygiene purposes. If we look at the state's plan with respect to River Borulu, we see that a lot of hopes have been placed on the sewage water treatment facility that is going. The sewage treatment facility that is going to be constructed not very far off from this area. There's also a proposal to make sure that the wastewater is being put to use, and some people have also spoken about converting Bharalu River into a waterway system. There is also plans of beautification of the area, constructing bridges and creating scenic installations to create walkways that are beautiful alongside the river Bharalu. However, none of that is actually of any use without the first major step, which cleaning of the river Bharalu and sectioning of the river Bharalu, which requires a lot, which is where the efforts should be invested. Not much has changed in the river Borulu. It still remains polluted and it still remains a dumping site. So the question is, what is it that is always stopping us from giving Borulu a new lease of life? Is it the fact that is it the fact that we don't have the right technologies to bring the change that we need to, or is it the fact that we have the right technology but we cannot implement it because whatever we try to do, the efforts are going to be futile in the absence of community support and community engagement? But if that is the case, what is the level of community support and community engagement that we want to make sure that the river achieves, that the plan to develop the river is executed? There's another popular anecdote that I can share with you with respect to the Borlu River, which is that not long ago there was a telecommunications company or one of these enterprises. I can't recall. I think it was a telecommunication company, but I might be wrong. So they put up a billboard just at the end of this particular just at the end of this river where we have a bridge. So the river doesn't end here, it continues, but there is a bridge. And just at the intersection of the river and the bridge, a billboard was put up with a raft. And the raft was on the billboard and it was tied with a rope. And it was quite interesting and also quite telling because it was meant as a flood response. So if this lane got flooded, you could just cut the rope and the raft would fall, and you could use the raft to go to your house. That is how bad the flooding situation has always been in the state and in this specific area of the state. So now we're going to talk about Deepor Beel, which is a wetland of international importance in Assam. Deepor Beel technically translates into lake, a gigantic lake of elephants, and that is actually related to fact because this site marks a favorite for Asiatic elephants, Asiatic aquatic elephants, which are endangered and which very often come from the hills down to the lake. However, the lake is the only site that has been designated as a Ramsar site under the Ramsar Convention in Assam. It's also the history of this place is that it used to be pristine, like most natural treasures of the world. But as time has gone by, the wetland has seen itself being transformed into an urban wetland and surrounded by urban villages. That's because honestly now the distance between the wetland and the city is not that much, just about like 45 minutes by car. That's how long I took to get to the wetland. The wetland is a very good case study to realize, to talk about the intersection of preserving ecological balance and also preserving the livelihood of the community. So the wetland is extremely important because it is a source of livelihood to about 14 indigenous communities located close by to the wetland. And the primary source of these people is fishing. They use the water in the lake. They very often come here to fish. And it's not just about fishing and selling the fish that they fish in the lake, but it's also the related work that comes from fishing, which is making of boats, repairs, and other fishery-related activities that keeps these communities going. Now, when the lake was designated as a wildlife sanctuary by the Indian government, the problem that happened was there was a big clash with the fishing rights of the community. Now, under the wildlife protection laws, the state can ban community fishing because that is not ideal for the natural ecosystem of the place. And before notifying this area as a sanctuary, the local community was not consulted. So that led to a lot of angst amongst the local community. This boiled up quite a bit when the Guwahati Municipal Corporation started waste dumping in an area of this wetland. The local community, however, refused to stay quiet about the plight of the wetland, and they have filed a case in the Supreme Court to protect their fishing rights. There is also an ongoing litigation in the Guwahati High Court, a public interest litigation that demands accountability from the state and asks the government to ban the state from waste dumping the city's waste in and around the wetland. And the issue here is this: it's not just about dumping the waste in the wetland. It's also about making sure that the area around the wetland is not contaminated because of waste dumping. Because not only does it impact the quality of the lake, the quality of the fish, but it also impacts their quantity. It also impacts the health and the overall well-being of people who live around the lake. Over the last few years, in fact, the lake has seen a deterioration in the bird species. It has also seen a deterioration in the quality of the fishes that the fishing community is fishing and selling more regularly. In fact, the most surprising move that came from the government was their decision to denotify the state government was a decision to denotify this area. And the denotification would basically mean that the area would no longer be a protected wetland or a wildlife sanctuary. That decision has not gone through, it has not been executed because the local people have intervened, and there is an order from the High Court that has stopped the state from issuing that modification in the absence of proper demarcation of the boundaries of the lake. And it's also not an easy decision for the state government to make. That is an advantage that India has, being a federation of states. We are a union of states, but state governments do have power. But at the end, many decisions require the consent of Supreme Court and the central government, and denotification of a protected wildlife area is one such decision. The point that scares a lot of people is, if the decline in the quality of ecology, biodiversity continues in this area, will it lead to Deepor Beel losing its status under the Ramsar Convention? That is an idea that does not excite many people, especially conservationists. And I think the other part that I have realized, at least from my interaction with people here, is that it's not the case that local communities want the site to be denotified to be able to fish, because denotification of the site brings its own problems. The site definitely benefits from receiving protection under environment and wildlife laws, and it will definitely benefit from being an eco zone. However, the struggle here is the involvement of local communities, keeping them involved, listening to what is it that they really want, and giving them a voice in the decision-making process, which a lot of people don't have. But I think the lesson to learn from the people here is that they have time and again utilize their rights to protect resources which are close to them. So I think that is something super inspiring about the local community. They shouldn't have to do it because it's not easy and it's a hassle for the local community to go to the court. But they have done it, which again speaks volumes about the passion of the people towards nature and the ability of the law to grant protection to biodiversity. Also the big need. There was some buzz about initially Deepor Beel also receiving funds and also receiving attention as part of the city's smart state vision, but a lot of that seems to have been that idea seems to have been scrapped, because I guess the understanding now from the data that I have researched is that Deepor Beel, the High Court litigation, will end up leading to some positive judgment in favor of Deepor Beel. The local community involvement will help the Deepor Beel, and the CSR funds of various companies could be targeted towards restoration activities of the Deepor Beel. The Asian waterbird census that released this year found more than 12,000 birds of across 105 species at this site. However, this is a great number, but this is a number that has declined over the years, and that is a point of concern for a lot of environmentalists and bird fans, because this is an area that sees a lot of birds, including pelicans, come here. The wetland Borsola Beel paints a sad story in the city of Guwahati. So at the moment, I'm standing right next to the Borsola Beel, which is a part of the Solar Beel, which has two parts, the Borsola Beel and the Borsola Beel. This Beel, and Beel means lake. Beel is actually located right in the center of the city. And this Beel has a tragic story. This Beel used to be pristine and you could see water in the Beel, but now this Beel has transformed into a dumping yard. The story goes like this. The revenue department did not really put checks in place when it decided to allocate land or sanction allocation of lands, purchase of lands on the banks of the wetlands. This was before 2000. And once that started happening, what the revenue department did not check was the encroachment that such property purchases led to. A big problem because of the encroachment was the reduction in the size of the lake, as well as blocking of the natural waterways in the lake, because of which has contributed to a lot of flooding in the city in the past. Now, it's important to note here that wetlands act as sponges, and when they are operating at their natural best capacity, they help maintain not only the ecosystem, or they're not only a hotspot for plants and animals or birds, but they also maintain, they also help with retention of water during the monsoon season. And retention of water and proper water management is a big issue in Guwahati, because we are actually at the foothills and we have Meghalaya right above. We have Meghalaya, which sits above Assam, and during monsoons, water comes down from Meghalaya to Assam. Now, the problem is we need the sponges of Assam to work properly so that the water is retained, the flood water is retained, and it does not flood the cities. And wetlands play an important role in it, but because of poor maintenance of wetlands, the natural retention capacity of the wetlands has reduced. So one of the factors is, of course, encroachment of the wetland area because of unchecked property allocation, and the revenue department hasn't really checked how the property encroachers are treating the banks of the wetlands. So that has led to a problem. You can see around me that there's so much waste and garbage that has been disposed in the wetland, and in fact it just functions as a garbage dumping yard. Now, the encroachment of people and the property purchases alongside the bank of the wetland wasn't taken lightly by the people. A petition was filed in the High Court requesting intervention to protect the wetlands, and the High Court did issue a direction that urged the state government to protect the wetlands. Eventually, Guwahati did enact the Water Bodies Preservation and Conservation Act of 2008, and that notifies this lake along with this wetland, along with others in the state. However, that notification hasn't really helped in restoring the lake to its former glory or taking care of the problems the lake faces. In fact, there have been really ambitious projects in the early 2000s to clean the lake, to construct joggers track alongside the lake, to beautify the lake. However, none of them have actually succeeded, and that remains a mystery as to why that has happened. Borsola Beel is an area of focus for the state, and the plans include working on the sewage treatment plant, which will make sure that the sewage from the city is not being discharged. The sewage treatment plan remains the highlight of this smart city plan. However, there are also concerns about the sewage treatment plan, because do we really want sewage treatment plants to be constructed alongside the wetlands? Because that doesn't really solve the problem of the encroachment, and it does not guarantee that the ecosystem around the wetlands is going to be unpolluted or unadulterated. That is one question. And if we look at all other activities that have been planned under the a smart city vision, which is beautification and constructing of bridges, none of that really serve any purpose unless and until the lake is first cleaned and sectioned properly, to ensure that the pollution and the silt in the lake is reduced to a minimum. I mean, if the lake is restored properly, then it has the potential to become a great tourist hotspot for the city, and that is the aim. But the question is, why do these projects keep falling through? What is it that's landing in the urban planning and the infrastructure building that is leading to the projects being stalled and the required effect not being achieved? So that is the story of the solar wetland, which has graced us with its presence right in the middle of the city. It remains a moot point as to whether the existing if anything can be done with the existing constructions which exist on the riverbank, which has already led to the size of the wetland being reduced. Currently, the size of the wetland is 25 acres. So we've reached the end of today's episode, and it has definitely been a very educational journey for me, because in exploring the interconnected water bodies of the state, I have definitely come to take more pride in the state and the natural resources that have been gifted to the state by the nature. But I'm also quite concerned at the ambivalence, or I would just say at the general apathy that has allowed the water bodies to reach this pathetic state of affairs that they have, which, and now everybody is just in a rush to rectify the situation. I think if we look at the history of rescue efforts, or river rescue efforts, or Bolu rescue efforts, we feel that there is every intention for people to make good things happen in the city. I don't think anybody wants the river to be the way it is. Everybody wants it to do well. So, my concern with my analysis and with my study of the interconnected water bodies in Guwahati city has been, are we repeating efforts constantly? One area which I've seen develop constantly is the riverfront. And I do believe it is so because we are banking on infrastructure and architecture. And that is honestly something that we are quite sure of scientifically. Whereas technology like cleaning river, changing the planning of streets that have existed for a very long time, that requires probably more resources, and it requires a different kind of expertise. And I don't know at this point what is the reason why we have not been able to crack that. Or if we have been able to crack that, what is the reason that we're not seeing that being implemented? So the question is how long? It's not the case that people have not tried to to put in effort to rescue the water bodies. They have tried. We have seen a lot of the efforts being congregated around the Brahmaputra, because I think that's an easy win for us. But what is if but we have noticed a lot of failures when it comes to the protection of other water bodies. And my concern here is, are we what are we missing something in our analysis? Are we missing something in our understanding of how our systems work? Not just how our system, but also how our local communities work, which is prohibiting, or which is becoming an impediment in helping us develop our own water bodies. I've also touched upon the point that local communities do want the environment to be protected, but not at the cost of their rights and their livelihoods. Therefore, we know that it is important to give our local communities a voice in the decision-making process. Main points here are, do we understand what our local community wants? Are we keeping them on board? Is there knowledge that we can take from the local community, from the local charities and local NGOs? And do we think we are becoming quite complacent? The other thing that we need to bear in mind is that we are a state, or the Assam is a state that is still needs a lot of, that is constantly pitching itself to draw investments. Can we draw investment and yet find a way to sustain those investments without affecting the environment, or without causing further damage to the environment? Do we think that is something that the state can achieve? These are hard questions that I believe even the state is trying to answer. And the SMART mission, I do think, puts the state to test. However, if we pass through the discomfort of amending the system as it stands, of protecting our waterways and wetlands, then maybe we will be able to reap a reward that will be beyond imagination for the state, be it in terms of the state's commitment towards sustainability, or the state's commitment towards execution of concept notes, or the state's, or maybe the state will write history in terms of fighting against the odds and rescuing the dead water bodies, and rescuing its water bodies, and creating a city that didn't exist before. There have been talks about whether the city can convert into a Venice format, where the interconnected waterways serve as a transport medium, or a medium for people to set up floating markets. And all of that again is great on paper, but all of that is contingent on first making sure that the water quality is that the contamination level of water reduces, and that in itself is a full-blown effort that's not going to happen easily. So the short point here being, leisure comes second, hard work for local community, for everybody, comes first. And it's not just for the government but also for the local community. Perhaps the need of the hour is also to break down our big concept notes into small execution plans, into small steps, and distribute those small steps more widely, so that the burden of restoring our natural resources and the burden of protecting our natural resources is spread evenly, and that people feel that they have taken an active part to create a change in their local community. On that note, I'm going to end today's episode, but stay tuned because there is a lot more to explore in this state, and I am definitely not done studying, exploring, analyzing, and experiencing all that Assam has to offer in terms of its biodiversity. And stay tuned and take care.